Simplicity dwells on a slippery slope. It's a quality often attributed to the plain, to the ordinary, a synonym for everything flavorless and bleached. But the thing is, the gap between simplicity and complexity, at least this perceived gap, it isn't necessarily so clear. It's not always so black and white. Speaking in terms of color, a ray of light is simple in a sense, but if you look at it through a piece of glass, well, the boring becomes the spectacular. You see a rainbow within the colorless, and simple becomes a synonym for beautiful as well. You could call BLOB 2 a simple game, but simplicity isn't always what it seems. In fact, deceptive simplicity is what BLOB 2 is all about. On the surface, the game looks like just another three-dimensional platformer, but in reality, there's a prism of color bursting from BLOB 2. Bright blues, radiant reds, and truly eclectic game design. Developed by the talented Australian studio Blue Tongue, BLOB 2 follows in the colorful paint smears of the 2008 original. Controlling a blob of paint who is buoyant in both the literal and figurative sense, it's your job to lead a resistance against the odious Inked Corporation and their leader, Comrade Black. They've sapped all color from BLOB's once vibrant world, enforcing a kind of grayscale fascism from which the only salvation is creativity. Your creativity, to be precise. But first and foremost, BLOB is a platformer. This sequel goes to great lengths to improve that aspect of the game and solidify its position as one of the Wii's best in the genre, and it achieves both with a splash of purple for punctuation. BLOB 2 takes notes from other modern platformers by mixing side-scrolling elements into its 3D foundation for a gameplay concoction that's anything but primary. In fact, there seems to be a real Mario Galaxy influence here, as evidenced further by the so-dubbed girlfriend mode for multiplayer, not to mention the spherical levels and gravity puzzles BLOB encounters later in his adventure. And believe me, there's nothing wrong with incorporating ideas from other games, especially when they mix together as beautifully as in BLOB 2. The big difference between Galaxy and BLOB, however, is that Galaxy is a reflection of Nintendo's creativity. It's someone else creating a world for you to play in. You handle those duties in BLOB 2, and that's what makes the game so special. After you absorb some paint from the dwindling pools that Inked has left behind, you can splash it wherever you see fit. Now, there are specific painting objectives, but for the most part, the game world literally becomes your canvas. You want the trees to be blue? Fine. You want the skyscrapers to be in alternating rows of green and red? It's your call. BLOB 2 is like Mario Galaxy meets Mario Paint, and that mixture is every bit as liberating as it is fun. Of course, the problem with this kind of free-roaming formula in the first BLOB was fitting it within a structure. And unfortunately, the restrictions still feel a bit arbitrary in BLOB 2. Each level has a time limit, but since you collect extra time for doing paint missions, the clock never becomes an issue. And, you know, putting a restriction on a game that is about freedom when it's at its best still feels counterproductive in BLOB 2. But again, that's a really minor problem, meaning it isn't exactly paint thinner. And even with its admittedly slow pace, this is still a fantastic and honestly an absolutely gorgeous game. The textures are fantastic for Wii, and the colors just pop right off the screen. If you liked BLOB, you'll love BLOB 2. It adds diversity, it cuts the waggle that made jumping so gimmicky in the first one, and it keeps the creativity as liberating as ever. But perhaps most importantly, BLOB 2 is also a better platformer. And that's a big reason this charming sequel sticks with you.